Hello and welcome to this premium episode number 390. I'm Cornelius Fichtner. As always, premium means that this is an interview that is reserved for you, our premium subscribers. So thank you for your financial support of the Project Management Podcast. Are you currently managing a multicultural project? Well, no matter if you answer yes or no to this, today's interview with Karin Brünnemann is for you. We will look at what culture is, how cultural differences can lead to conflict, and how culture affects the various dimensions of conflict on projects that we learned about when we last spoke to Karin. Most importantly, we will of course also discuss approaches for conflict resolution. So, if you answered yes to my question, are you currently managing a multicultural project? Then you are going to learn a lot about culture, conflict, and what to do about it. And if you answered no, then you will learn that your answer was in fact wrong and that you should have answered yes. You are managing a multicultural project. And so, put on your national costume and enjoy the interview.
The Project Management Podcasts feature interview. Today with Karin Brünnemann, PMP, intercultural expert.
Hallo Karin, willkommen zurück.
Dobry wieczór, Cornelius. Ako sa máš?
Okay, now you have surprised me. That was Slovakian?
This was Slovak, yes.
Okay, wonderful. And I think that's a very good beginning of this discussion because we want to talk about conflict in multicultural projects. And to get us started with this, when I read your bio, I saw that you have lived in 9 countries and you worked in 26 countries. What is your personal takeaway when it comes to culture and conflict?
Yes, thank you. That's has been my career so far, but I'm still adding to both lists. So I'm not finished with moving and traveling yet. First of all, of course, projects are handled differently across different cultures. Living in Slovakia, I call Bratislava my hometown, although I was not born here. I'm a member, even founding member of the PMI Slovakia chapter. And yes, there are differences in terms of working in projects here in Slovakia. I have been living and working in projects in Colombia, in Guatemala, in Scandinavian countries, in Spain, in Portugal, in Turkey, etc. So definitely project management as such and conflict management in projects is handled differently in different parts of the world. However, you asked me for my take on culture, and one of my lessons learned from my worldwide travel, that culture is so much more than just nationality. And in project teams, this holds especially true because we work with different departments, and salespeople are totally different than accountants. And again, they're totally different than warehouse managers. We're also having a professional culture, but we're also having organizational culture. So the organization where I do the project, if this organization cooperates with suppliers, with customers, they're working in different companies. Some of them are small, some of them are big. They might work with official organization or government institutions who again have a different organizational culture. There are industry sector cultures. So automotive companies might work in general differently from an education company, for example. So my main take from my travels is, yes, we're all different, but it's not just nationality. It's so much more. So multicultural project management does not mean only multinational project management.
How far do I have to travel before differences in culture begin to matter?
I have to go upstairs to my neighbors.
So this close, huh?
Well, actually, I don't even have to go upstairs. I can stay on the same floor. Yes, it's sometimes amazing how similar people are if you travel far away. For example, the organization I work for, they have a large workforce in Sri Lanka. People there, they work across. They work according to PMBOK standards, so we have an immediate understanding. However, if I might work with another company in Slovakia, they might work according to a different standard, and we have a different understanding. And since our overall topic is conflict, such differences in understanding can, of course, lead to conflict. So it's not just managing project in China or India or South Africa, Uzbekistan, Honduras that leads to potential conflicts in projects. We have to really be very observant that other cultural aspects can actually, even at home, cause cultural conflict.
Since you are living in Slovakia right now and you've been all around the world, is project management done differently in Slovakia from a cultural perspective than elsewhere?
Yes, it is. It's not so much about the standard. I mean, we have, as I said before, the PMI Slovakia chapter. All the members, they work according to the PMBOK standard, but the understanding, the interpretation of such standards can be different, and we have to consider that it's always people working with those standards. The standards have to be filled. And yes, there are quite big differences between Slovakia and the US and between other countries and regions of the world as well.
All right, let's bring it back to the central topic of our discussion. I think we've outlined the topic of culture quite well, and our primary discussion really is conflict in multicultural projects. So let's take a look at the culture and conflict. In which aspects of conflict can I find cultural differences?
Basically, in all aspects, you can find differences, starting with the understanding of conflict. It can happen that I have a heated, animated discussion with a fellow team member in a project, and that for me and for the other party is just a normal discussion. But somebody from a different culture might already perceive this as a conflict. So we don't all have the same understanding of what conflict is, which is very basic things. Then, of course, the emergence of conflict. Why does conflict come into being? And there we have some additional risks of conflicts springing up if we are working in a multicultural environment. And these risks can, for example, be in communication. There can be misunderstandings and misinterpretations. We have to be careful that even if English is the project language, there are hundreds of different Englishes around the world. Australian English is different from Canadian English, is different from US English, is different from UK English. And now imagine you have a multinational project where 80% of your team members don't even have English as their first language or their native language. So there might be a lot of misunderstandings. you can have different assumptions. It's very, very difficult to know your own assumptions. And if you want to be culturally competent, you need to learn how to elicit your own assumptions. I give you a very easy example. When I go to a restaurant and I order some food, I assume that it will be served on a plate and I get a knife and fork with it. I don't tell the waiter, please bring me a steak and serve it on a plate and bring me a fork and a knife. I assume this. Now, I travel to China and I go to a restaurant, I order food. I might be very surprised because I don't get a plate, I get a bowl, and I don't get knife and fork, I get chopstick instead. Only then, when my assumptions don't work anymore, I realize that I had this assumption. So it's very difficult for us ourselves. This is so deep inside us. We don't think about it. We don't think that we need to say that food has to come on the plate. Another thing is unclear intentions. We sometimes don't know what people are aiming at, and that can lead to us misinterpreting what people really want. We think they want something bad, but they really want to help us. Then, of course, we have all different values. We have talked a bit about this in the last session of this podcast. Can women be project managers everywhere in the world? And I think they cannot. And also a lack of trust. The more different people are from us, the less we usually trust them. We are always looking for things we have in common. And if we can't really find anything in common, we don't build trust. And all this can lead to or enhance conflict. Then, of course, the conflict itself, the process of the conflict, the course the conflict takes, can be different in terms of how fast does it escalate? Does it escalate at all? How easy it is to de-escalate, etc. And last not least, the way we manage conflict can be very different, starting from the question, who has the authority to manage the conflict? Now, is it usual that the conflicting parties solve it themselves? Is it okay to tell the project manager to ask for help, or is it not okay? And so you see there is a lot of cultural differences involved in conflict management in projects.
In the first interview that you and I did, we learned a lot about the theory, hot, cold, constructive, destructive, then also, how to handle it, avoid, compromise, collaborate, all of these terms. Let's maybe walk a little bit through these here. You already mentioned that culture influences our understanding of conflict. What you consider to be a conflict, I don't. It's just a normal discussion. Is there any other way how culture influences the understanding of our conflict?
Yes, for example, the involved actors in a conflict. Mm-hmm. There are some cultures where it's quite normal to have third parties involved. I think even the European Union has a mediation law, so you're actually encouraged to use external advisors in terms of the conflict process. There are certainly cultures who would never ever get the idea to solve a conflict without a mediator, and there are cultures who would not get the idea to actually extend this conflict to a third party. That is one example of where culture can make a difference.
Can it also make a difference in regards to the classification of conflict? So hot versus cold, constructive versus destructive?
Yes, absolutely. It is in some cultures, and I'm not talking just national cultures, it can be organizational cultures, where it's just not really accepted that the conflict gets hot, that you're passionate and you maybe start getting loud, but the culture is in a way that you have to be humble and keep your voice down and not get upset and not get too emotional. So you can have in some cultures the situation that the conflict gets hot faster, or in other cultures the conflict will just stay cold and it will never really boil to the surface. And also constructive versus destructive. In some cultures, more encouraged, as you told me, for example, about your company. You have your company culture promotes constructive conflict, but in other company cultures, in companies where they have a very competitive company culture, it can be that there are more destructive conflict than constructive.
So probably not a good idea for me to work in a company where all conflict has to remain cold, because I can get so passionate. Yeah. We also learned about the various types of conflict, conflict of interest, values, norms, goals, etc. How does culture influence those?
It can influence it in many ways. There are cultures that are, for example, more individualistic or more collectivistic. Again, this is not limited to different countries, but in tendency, if I have a more collective culture in the country, in the company, in my profession, I am less likely to incur a conflict of interest because I have more shared interest. I would share resources more than compete for them, and so on. And then, of course, if we talk about values or norms, what sets us apart in different cultures is the fact that we have different values and different norms. So there you have a whole range of potential conflict sources that can lead to and actually also promote escalation of conflict if these different values and norms clash in a project. Goals can be different. Of course, again, do I want to achieve a goal for myself or for my team? Or think about the triple constraints in the project, the time, cost, and scope. If I have a culture of that values time as money, time is money, that means my goals of project time management and project cost management, they should be equal. But in other cultures, like my own culture, for me, time is not equaling money. Time equals life. And so I have different goals. Then, of course, factors like relationships and roles. Think about friendship in the workplace. Can I be good friends with a project manager, or can I, as a project manager, have really friendly relationship with my team, or should that be more distance? Should I just be the boss, or somebody else is the boss? Do I go out with my team in the evening, or do I keep a strict separation between work and private? Again, this can all lead to conflict.
Let's also talk about the mode of handling the conflict, avoiding it, collaborating, compromising. Are certain cultures more prone to wanting to go one way than the other?
Absolutely. There are cultures that would not even want a win-win outcome of a conflict, because for them it's not an option. They are very competitive cultures. Like in sports, somebody has to win. If you run 100 meters, you want to have one clear winner and the loser. You will not cross the finishing line holding hands with your team at the same time. So yes, absolutely. There are cultures, for example, where it's very important to keep faith. You would probably be more prone to compromising or collaboration rather than competition or accommodation of conflict.
After all of this, looking at culture and conflict on projects, there are two topics left for us to discuss here. in the interview. One of them is the lessons learned, and then we want to go back to the 4-step process that we discussed at the end of the first project. But there's something that I'd like to interject here, and I wanted to get your opinion on this. The topic of our discussion right now is conflict in multicultural projects. But from everything that I have heard right now, every project is multicultural. There is no such thing as a unicultural project, a project that has only one culture. So shouldn't we just simply say, whenever you have a conflict on a project, don't forget to think about how culture, your culture, the other person's culture, the company culture, the culture of the city, the towns that you live in, affects how you deal with conflict on the project.
I could not have said that any better, Cornelius.
Yes.
You're absolutely right.
I passed the exam. Okay.
You did. Of course, there are these things are two extremes of a sliding scale.
Yes, agreed.
You can have more or less diversity in the project, but you're totally right. There is no unicultural project. It does not exist at all. But projects can be more, to lesser or greater extent, prone to cross-cultural issues, if we want to put it that way. But it does not harm any project manager to learn about cross-cultural management, because in every project you will actually benefit from such knowledge.
Wonderful. All right, let's come to closing our discussion here. We want to take a look at the lessons learned, like I said, and also review the 4-step process that we discussed at the end of the previous interview. And I think those 4 lessons learned that you have, and also the 4-step process, they're kind of overlapping. So maybe we want to mix them in. So why don't you walk us through the lessons learned that you have, and how this applies to the 4 steps that we discussed and the multicultural aspect of conflict resolution?
Okay. Well, the first lesson learned is that the project manager, who is, according to the PMBOK skills triangle, responsible for conflict management, this project manager needs to analyze any conflict, because if you don't know how to categorize it as a hot or cold, constructive or destructive conflict, if you don't know what type of conflict it is it a conflict of interest, of values, etc., and if you do not know at which escalation stage a particular conflict is at the moment, it will be very difficult to solve it, because you don't really know what you're dealing with, and it will be very difficult to find the best solution for all involved parties and for the project itself. And there, of course, if we go back to this 4-step process, you have to look at step 1, determine the problem, which, of course, you need to see all this in a cultural context. Is it maybe just a misunderstanding, or is it a true divergence of opinion? Already in this first step, you have a lot of cultural aspects to consider. Then, of course, as a second step, or as a second lesson learned, the project manager has to determine how the conflict should be managed based on the previous analysis of the conflict. The project manager has to define the conflict handling modes. Are we accommodating it? Are we collaborating? Are we competing here in the conflict solution? And then determine how it will be actually managed. Are we going to negotiate a solution? Are we reaching out to a third party? Which already brings us to the third step of the conflict resolution process. where we develop alternative solutions and evaluate the solutions and select one. These potential solutions, they depend on the previous analysis of the type and escalation stage of the conflict, and of course of the cultural background and expectations and values of the involved parties. And then the next step 3 of the lessons learned is really to implement the solution. And again, the implementation includes, we have to define concrete measures. And there we also have to, of course, define what we call with war, who is doing what and when. And there you can have cultural differences, because does the project manager have to do everything? Does the team do it by themselves? Do we need external help? What's the time frame? If we say this solution has to be implemented by next Friday, how secure is that deadline? Do we all have to understand it in the same way, or is there maybe a room for postponing even the word deadline? It would be interesting if anybody who is listening to this now knows any word in another language that is as hard as the word deadline in English. Please let me know, because this is also a cultural thing, that we create a defined time frame, and that's really a deadline, so it has to be done by then. And as we all know, if we have worked internationally or with other organizational cultures, timeframes do not always represent really hard deadlines. And the last of the lessons learned is really cultural aspects have to be considered in all stages of conflict management, in all aspects of conflict management, because there are sometimes severe differences in these.
Karin, once again, thank you so much for your time and talking to us about the topic of managing conflict in multicultural projects. I appreciate it.
Muchas gracias, Cornelius.
And I think the proper response is de nada?
Correct.
And that was our multicultural project conflict discussion with Karin Brünnemann. And that's it. Thank you very much for listening. As always, you can find us on the web at pm-podcast.com. Please send your emails to info@pm-podcast.com. And when you write, please tell me where in the world you are writing from. And finally, we have this quote by T.D. Jakes that is so appropriate for us project managers. I like to see myself as a bridge builder. That is me building bridges between people, between races, between cultures, between politics, trying to find common ground. Until next time.